Prop 15 will amend the Constitution to allow commercial and industrial properties to be taxed at market value rather than the purchase price.
Our guest today is Mr. Tino Rossi, a native of Bakersfield, who has worked in Sacramento for the Senate Minority Leader Shannon Grove, and later for the Rice Growers Association of California as the Director of Communications and Government Affairs. Mr. Rossi currently works at Meridian Pacific Incorporated, a nationwide firm specializing in strategic, political, and consulting and public affairs. And it is with us today as a statewide coalition director for No on Prop 15 campaign. Welcome, Mr. Rossi.
Thank you so much, Carol. I always know it's going to be a great presentation when I'm introduced by an Italian woman. I just love it. Us Italians with our hand talking on Zoom, it's just been a fun quarantine for us. So thanks for the introduction.
Absolutely.
Thanks to the association for hosting us today. And more than anything, thanks for being vital partners in our effort to defeat what would be the single largest property tax increase in state history. I've got a brief presentation planned for you today where I'm going to outline not only a little bit more about what Prop 15 is, but how our campaign came to form, why we're opposed to Proposition 15, and lastly, what we think, even with 13 days till the election, you and your friends and neighbors and colleagues can do to help us defeat Proposition 15. So let's go ahead and dive right in here. You're going to hear me today say that I hope you take three main things away from this presentation. The first one is going to be that Proposition 15 is the single largest property tax increase in state history at $11.5 billion a year. And how do we get there? You heard Bill at the top mention Proposition 13. And to fully understand what Proposition 15 does, we've got to rewind nearly 42 years to the 1970s in California. Some of you may remember in these times, homeowners, veterans, seniors, small business owners, farmers, they were experiencing these volatile increases in their property taxes year after year after year. Many folks were really scared that these sharp increases and this unpredictability in our property tax system was going to lead them to have to either leave the state, sell their home, or, pick up another job, find more income, something of that nature. And this concern led to a grassroots movement that put Proposition 13 on the November ballot in 1978. And what Prop 13 said was, in California, here's how we'll assess all properties, residential, commercial, and industrial. Whenever you purchase a property, whatever the price of purchase is, we're going to take 1% of that and make that your property tax base. So if I bought a $100,000 commercial building in 1978, my property taxes were $1,000. Now, we recognize that local governments depend on property taxes, especially our schools, and we needed to make sure that these bases were keeping up with inflation and increased costs. So Prop 13 actually allows property taxes to rise 2% of that 1% year after year. Well, for now, more than 42 years, we've enjoyed this certainty and stability under Prop 13. Homeowners are no longer blindsided by sharp increases in their property value. Small businesses can factor in their property taxes into a part of their operating expense and know for certain what that bill is going to be. It's perhaps been the most beloved and renowned proposition passed in California, and that's Proposition 13. Now let's fast forward back to 2020 and look at Proposition 15. What Proposition 15 does, and you may have heard it called the split roll initiative, and the reason it's referred to that is it would literally split the property tax roll so that residential properties continue to enjoy Prop 13 protections. That is, they keep their 1% property tax base and their 2% cap year after year. But commercial and industrial properties will now be forced to be reassessed at least every 3 years. It could be more often. It could even be annually at highest and best use value. And so what this does is it opens up large properties and a lot of properties to huge increases in their property tax bill year after year after year, and really creates an environment of uncertainty. So again, split roll is going to say residential, you get to keep on keeping on with your Prop 13 protections, but commercial and industrial, every 3 years, An assessor is coming to your property. They're thinking about what it could be sold for on that day, and that will be what your property taxes are calculated off, not what the purchase price is. So what's the threat? Well, the threat is it undermines Prop 13. As realtors, I'm sure, especially dealing with commercial spaces or even residential spaces, you understand Californians may not know a lot about the policy of our state, but they certainly know what Prop 13 is, and they certainly know it's one of the last few taxpayer protections we have in our state. Now, why do we think that undermining Prop 13's protections for commercial and industrial properties are so bad? Well, let's get into that a little bit. First and foremost, you're going to hear the proponents of the measure, the people who are supporting Prop 15, say that only big, huge corporations are going to pay this tax. But let me be very, very clear. This is not an income tax. This is not a gross receipts tax. This isn't a total volume of sales tax. This is a property tax. And the problem with that is most of the small businesses in the state of California, in fact, 76% to be exact, rent the property they operate their business on. And what happens is, many of you may know, showing commercial spots that are open for lease in strip malls or retail centers, is that when they negotiate this lease, almost every single commercial and industrial lease has what's called a triple net or gross lease in it. Meaning, when the small business owner signs the lease and gets the keys to their new restaurant or their new hair salon or their new deli, they agree at the date of signing to pay some increased costs. It could be maintenance, upkeep of common areas, insurance, but especially property taxes. It's one of the key components of almost every small business lease in the state. It says, I, as a small business tenant, agree to pay any increases in property taxes. So I want you to imagine for a second in San Dimas or wherever you're from, that the local strip mall that you go to, where there's a Subway franchise, there's a haircut place, there's a coffee joint, there's a music store, all of those are renting from one commercial property owner. Well, the proponents like to think that that retail mall or that strip mall owner is going to pay these taxes. It's not the case. As soon as this $11.5 billion is passed on to property owners legally in the leases, the tenants, the small business owners are required to pay that cost. Now, I just asked you to imagine that strip mall. I'm sure if you're imagining it this month, it's got a lot of for lease signs in it. It's got a lot of closed until the pandemic's over. These are the small businesses we've asked to shut their doors. We've asked them to lay off employees. Some have taken loans with high interest rates to stay afloat. And at the same time, Californians are being asked to consider an $11.5 billion increase that would be paid directly by our small businesses. Simply put, folks, this is the wrong time and the wrong solution for an issue at hand, and we cannot burden our already struggling small businesses with $11.5 billion in taxes. In fact, one independent study by Pepperdine University found that if Prop 15 passes, it will result immediately in 120,000 private sector job losses. It's amazing to think that in this pandemic, we're considering something that could be so detrimental on our road to recovery. Let's talk a little bit about farmers. And sometimes I'll give this presentation and folks will say, well, ag's not really a big component in our county or in our city, so I'm not as concerned about the ag issue. Well, you should be. One is that the proponents aren't being honest about how it impacts agriculture. It is true, and I want to be clear, that ag land is exempt from reassessment under Prop 15. That is, the dirt that is used to grow the commodities will not be subject to this tax. However, it does say that fixtures and improvements for ag production are subject to reassessment. These are things like trees, vines, wineries, dairies, processing facilities, packing sheds, shipping centers, everything that California agriculture needs to bring food from the farm to the fork will be subject to taxation under Prop 15. And again, you may be saying, ag's not the biggest part of our community. What would that impact be on us? California is fortunate enough to be a major agriculture force in the world. In fact, 6 out of the 10 top producing ag counties in the world are right here in California. And what luxury that affords us as Californians is we have access to some of the most quality, safest, and affordable food supplies in the world. Well, the California Farm Bureau Federation, the Western Growers Association, the Ag Council of California, as well as more than 24 statewide and regional ag organizations have all said, if we are forced to pay this increased property tax, we have but one choice: increase the cost of our goods and services. We're talking about eggs, milk, grapes, fruit, oranges, nuts, everything that you depend on to put food onto your table is going to get more expensive under Proposition 15. And again, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We've got record unemployment. Folks are struggling to make ends meet. We simply cannot afford another cost of living increase as it relates to literally a necessity, which is our food supply. And that is why, despite what the proponents claim, you're going to find that every major ag organization, every farmer in the state is no on 15 because they know it impacts their ability to bring you good quality food. And to wrap that out, cost of living, I don't need to describe to anyone on this group that affordability is a major issue in California. We're in the midst of a crisis. Housing is expensive, resources are expensive, utilities are getting expensive. Anything that threatens to increase the cost of living, even by $1, should be soundly rejected considering the social economic crisis that we're experiencing with COVID-19. You're looking at taxation on gas stations, you're looking at taxation on daycare facilities, hospitals, farms, small businesses, every service that we depend on for our living to make a life here in California is going to be subject to this tax. And in the end, these producers of these products have really some simple choices. One, I could close my doors, many of which have already made that choice, unfortunately. NFIB says 60% of their members are considering never opening back up after the pandemic, which is very sad. The second is they could lay off employees. Again, a really grim, proposition. Many of these employees have been employed there for years. It may be their first job, their second chance job. So they can lay off employees, which isn't good for the economy. Or finally, they can increase the cost of living. They can increase what they're selling those products for. And that really means that this $11.5 billion that I keep talking about, well, where does it end up at the end of this? It ends up right squarely on our shoulders, the consumers. We are going to be the ones that pay this tax. Most Californians are smart enough to know that, $11.5 billion doesn't appear out of nowhere. And if there's a tax that's created, ultimately gets passed on to the consumer. I want to spend a little time talking about this one because it is one that's a little contentious. I want to be very clear when I say this. Proposition 15 does not impact homeowners. If Proposition 15 passes, not one homeowner will experience reassessment under Prop 15. Having said that, our campaign and the folks that are in our coalition, from the NAACP to the National Action Network to United Latinos Vote to the California Farm Bureau Federation to the California Association of Realtors to the California Rental Housing Association, all of them agree Prop 15 is just but the first step in repealing Prop 13 protections all together. In fact, they've admitted it as such. I encourage you, go to our website. We have a section at noonprop15.org that outlines the statements made by the supporters and architects of the proposition, where they state that repealing Prop 13 in its entirety is their ultimate goal. We simply feel like any chink in the armor to Prop 13, which is what Prop 15 is, lends itself, it opens the door for future assaults on the most important protection we have in California. It's what's kept the housing market alive here in California, are those protections. It encourages people to buy because they know year after year they're going to be able to afford the property taxes. We firmly believe Prop 15 is a recipe for frog soup. And I call it frog soup because my grandma used to say, if you're going to boil a frog alive, son, you don't just throw it in a boiling pot of water. First, you got to put it in some room temperature water and you got to turn it up dial by dial by dial. And this is that first turn, folks. It really is the first step in repealing Prop 13 in its entirety. I just outlined a whole host of flaws, from how it impacts small businesses to how it impacts consumers to how it impacts housing. And, there's a lot more flaws that I don't have time to get into. And as unfortunate as it is, our campaign recognized that if we're going to communicate these flaws, we've got to have a coalition from the communities that are going to be impacted that can talk about those flaws. So when I say Prop 15 is going to make income inequality worse, that's not coming from our campaign. That's coming from the California State Conference of the NAACP, the California State National Action Network, which is Al Sharpton's group, the United Latinos Vote, all agree that Prop 15 disproportionately impacts communities of color and will make income inequality worse. When I say it impacts agriculture, well, we've got the cattlemen's, we've got Farm Bureau, we've got Western growers. The proponents say that it doesn't impact small businesses. Well, small businesses disagree. The California Restaurant Association, retailers, small businesses, National Federation of Independent Business, and every regional chamber of commerce in the state all agrees it does impact small businesses, and they are all no on Prop 15. So I say that to show that this is a very diverse, bipartisan coalition. In fact, former LA Mayor Antonio Villagrosa is no on 15. Former Speaker of the Assembly and San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown is no on 15, including 10 or 12 current Democrat legislators, all opposed to this because they recognize that it's not being described accurately by the proponents. One other thing I'll add, you'll see all of the groups here that are a part of our coalition. I also like to call out the groups that chose not to endorse Prop 15. So a little background on what would happen if Prop 15 passes is $11.5 billion, hopefully, would be generated. And it would get distributed in the following ways. The first ways is the first chunk of money has to go back to the state to backfill for any losses from a county and personal income tax. So the first bite at this $11.5 billion doesn't go to your communities. It doesn't go to schools. It goes to the state of California up in Sacramento. The second bite at the $11.5 billion apple goes to the assessors. Remember, if this is going to pass, this requires massive reassessment like we've never done in California. And the Assessors Association, which, by the way, is opposed to Prop 15, has said it's impossible to administer. We simply cannot do it. Regardless, let's assume they could. It would cost them $1 billion to implement it. They've got to train staff. They've got to hire staff. They've got to create a new system for appraisals. A whole mess that would be created for the assessors. So that $1 billion now is gone from the 11.5. So let's say we're left with $9.5 billion after we pay the state back and we give it to the assessors. Well, the next bite at the apple goes to county governments. It says 60% of the remaining revenue has to go to counties, cities, and school districts. And then whatever's left over, which is about 30%, goes to schools. Now, I just described the biggest beneficiaries of the initiative: cities, counties, special districts, and school boards. Well, weirdly enough, the California School Boards Association, the California League of Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association have all declined to endorse Prop 15. So why would the biggest beneficiaries of $11.5 billion decide not to engage in this campaign? It's simple. They know this is not guilt-free money. They know this hurts small businesses. They know this hurts agriculture, and they know this will make the cost of living worse for all Californians. So with that said, we're in the part of the campaign. We've got 13 days left. It's crazy, folks. Here we are, middle of October, 13 days till the weirdest election cycle in history wraps up. And we know that we've got a strong coalition. Again, we've been building for 9 months. Our coalition, we've been pounding the pavement with those messages. We know we've got to spend the next 13 days communicating to voters with the right message why they should vote no on Prop 15. So if you're asked by a neighbor, if you're asked by a colleague, if you're asked while you're taking one of your friend's kids to school, why they should vote no on Prop 15. Well, first and foremost, if Prop 15 passes, homeowners are next. We've got to protect Prop 13, folks, at all costs. Next is a really easy one to relate to. Now is just not the right time for the largest property tax increase in state history. We're talking about $11.5 billion a year after year after year after year, squarely on the backs of small businesses, farmers, and consumers. Third, Prop 15 increases the cost of living for all Californians. It's that simple. You folks are smart. You work with businesses. You run your own businesses, your business folk. You know that for any business, if their operating expense increases in some way or another, they've got to pass that expense on to their consumer. They just have to. The margins here in California are too thin for businesses to just absorb increases. And lastly, folks, we got to protect our small businesses. I mean, every community has those small businesses that just make it great. It's the deli you've gotten the same sandwich at for 10 years. It's the dry cleaner you've gone to, since you were a little kid. It's the ice cream shop that started in your hometown. It's these great businesses that we've really got to do our best to protect. And so those are the messages we really want to encourage folks to spread around. Lastly, on the grassroots side, I said there's 13 days left. And so at this point, the mailers have mailed, the ads are up on TV. We've done our best at the editorial boards. And at this point, it's really that mouth-to-mouth communication, that peer-to-peer communication that we've got to rely on. Any other election cycle, I'd be in a van with a bunch of yard signs. This would be like a traveling circus. I'd be in a gym somewhere giving this speech. But it's just not how COVID allowed this election cycle to go. So instead, we're really relying on our coalition partners. We're really relying on our grassroots champions to help us spread the word. The easiest thing you can do right now to help us defeat Prop 15, go to noonprop15.org, go to the Take Action page, and you'll see a whole host of things that you can tick through, whether it's posting on social media, writing a letter to the editor. We've got about 35 volunteers. I'm actually looking at it right now, online, texting voters. Hey, here's why you should vote no on Prop 15. Help us out. Help us send some text. There's a really easy volunteer to text link where you can sign up. It's a super easy app. You push one button, it sends a text. So that's what we're looking for these last 15 days. And then of course, if there's any chance in these tough times, you're able to spare any expense to help financially, and that's appreciated. To be blunt and transparent, it's an election year. It's a presidential election year and we live in California. It is really, really expensive to advertise and to talk to voters. And we know we have the right messages. We know we view the policy in the right way. We know we have the right messengers. Now we just need help getting those messengers on TV, getting them in mailboxes, getting them on Facebook. And so any small contribution you can make to our campaign goes directly to voter contact to help ensure Prop 15 passes. So with that, I'm going to let some oxygen back into the room. I could go for hours on this, but again, the three things to take away from this. Prop 15 is the single largest property tax increase in state history. Proposition 15 would destroy our small businesses, the small businesses we love so much. And finally, this $11.5 billion is going to be paid by one person and one person only, and that is you, the consumer. At the end of the day, $11.5 billion doesn't appear out of nowhere, and it's going to get paid by the consumer. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Happy to answer any questions, and more importantly, vote, 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 and vote no on Prop 15. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tino. There is a question that popped up in the chat. Before we get to that, I do want to let you know that if anybody has any questions about anything that we've discussed today, you can put those in the chat. Bill Rue, who did an introduction on the proposition today, he did give me a link, and I put that link in the chat, ballotpedia.org, and you can find where you can follow that link to go view more information on Prop 15, or you can search other propositions that are on the ballot. I know I've been there several times doing my research, and I hope that you do yours as well. But the question in the chat that came up was, what about commercial multifamily properties?
Yeah, good question, common question. A lot of you, because you're so familiar with real estate, and my mom's a commercial mortgage broker, so I grew up around real estate and real estate agents. That the multifamily properties are the new big thing, especially around transit centers. And many of you might assume that this initiative prioritizes zoning. If something's zoned commercial, then it gets taxed. If something's zoned industrial, gets taxed. It actually prioritizes use over zoning. So because multifamily properties have a residential use component to them, they're actually exempt. The residential portion is exempt from reassessment under Proposition 15. So things like apartment buildings, or those things where you'll see like a Starbucks and a haircut place underneath, and then a bunch of apartments up top. All of the apartments and residential use buildings are exempt from Proposition 15 for now. Again, this is why California Apartment Association, California Rental Housing Association, and now the California Association of Realtors are opposed to Prop 15, because while for the moment it exempts these facilities, in the goal of generating future revenue, we do think the proponents will come back for those properties as well. And I'll just add one thing. If anyone has any questions, again, I encourage you to submit them to the chat box. I mentioned that I grew up around real estate agents, and my mom's a commercial real estate broker. All of us want to see public school systems succeed, and we want our local governments to thrive. We don't want potholes in our roads. My concern is, I remember playing baseball when I was a kid, and my local realtor was the person who sponsored the team. Their name was on my back. And when I would go to a fundraiser at the high school, they would donate a gift basket. The real estate industry does such an amazing job of investing in their local communities and being a part of their local communities. It's just not acceptable in our view to punish these businesses, these small businesses, these folks in that sector, under the guise of providing more funding for school. Again, less than 40% of this money goes to school. And we want to support the folks who make our communities great. And we think Proposition 15 falls short of providing a place where you can continue to do business, you can continue to invest in your community, and you can continue to be a part of it. So I wanted to give a shout out to all real estate agents. I love them. Half a dozen of my friends are real estate agents. You guys are so great and such a big part of our communities that we want to do everything we can to protect you.
Thanks for that. The realtors in our association are top notch. So thank you for that. And a question came in the chat. Who are the authors and proponents for Prop 15? Great question.
Yeah, super great question. So I'm going to do the three biggest funders. They have a lot of supporters. We have more, just bragging there, humble brag for a second, but their top three funders, number one is the California Teachers Association. So they've contributed about $20 million through all their local chapters and state chapters to Proposition 15. The second biggest funder, which may surprise you, is Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has given about $11 million, which is really, really disappointing. He made one of his big goals at the beginning of the year, addressing income inequality, and supporting this measure really flies in the face of that. In fact, Alice Huffman, the president of the NAACP, and Dr. Takoy Porter, who runs Al Sharpton's group here in California, wrote a letter to him really expressing their disappointment because this measure really impacts communities of color. So disappointing to see Mr. Zuckerberg contribute so heavily to this. And then finally, SEIU, Service Employees International Union, is the third largest funder. So a lot of public sector unions, big tech is supporting this at a pretty high clip. And really organized labor are the main proponents and authors of this. Hoping folks chip in, help us out in terms of spreading the word, talking to their neighbors. If you go on our Take Action page, like I mentioned, we've got a lot of printable resources. We've got a lot of ready to plug and play social media posts, graphics, letter to the editor guides, really 10, 15 minutes of you ticking through that page and doing one or two of those activities is really, really helpful to our campaign. Oh, one thing I missed that I think folks like to hear about, I kind of outlined this doom and gloom Prop 15, and people want to know, well, is it going to pass? And so I'll spend just a little time talking about some of the public polling. In April of 2020, Proposition 15 was supported by 55% of likely voters. This is a simple majority ballot proposition, so 51% enacts Proposition 15. So 55% in April of this year, right as the pandemic started to escalate, supported changes to Proposition 13. Well, since April, we've been hard at work working with the media and our coalition partners, working with you guys to get those social media posts out, those letters to the editors. And it's really exciting to announce that the last survey that came out in September had them at 49%. So what we're doing is working. The support we're getting from groups like yours is working. And there's actually going to be a new poll released at 9 p.m. tonight. Not sure what the results of that are, but my suspicion is you will actually see them dip even lower because of the great work that our coalition has done in our earned media team in exposing the flaws. Once voters learn that it impacts small businesses, that it impacts farmers, and that it increases their cost of living, they pretty soundly reject it. So we're hoping that trend continues. So that's all I have. Again, if any questions come in while I'm on, happy to answer them, but I will turn that back over to our friends at the association.
Great. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. This session is being recorded, so we do encourage everybody to share this. You can visit this on CVAR.live to be able to get the replay as well as it being on social media. Again, we just thank you so much, Tino, for being here today, giving us such great information. And again, realtors out there, we need your help. Let's get the word out there. Thank you so much again for everybody attending, and we hope you have a great afternoon.